Hello, I have been painting and teaching watercolour for 25 years. In that time, I have taught hundreds of students and can safely say that the most important skills are the basic ones. This video is the first in a series of relatively easy paintings for you to try. They're designed to help you develop your skill with basic watercolour techniques and equipment, while at the same time allowing you to produce a nice painting. I hope you enjoy these videos, and if you have any questions or requests, please leave them in the comment section below. I'll start by drawing a line about a third of the way up the paper. This will be my horizon line. I'll then put in a couple of different sized hills and then a zigzag path into the distance to add space on the ground. For the sky, I'm going to mix some cobalt blue. That's all we need for that. And for the ground, it's slightly pale green colour. Let's start with the sky first. And I test my colours, my starting colours anyway, before I start painting. For the green, I'll start with some aureolin and I'll add some cobalt turquoise to that. Aureolin is a cool yellow, meaning it leans to the blue or the green. And that's not bad for our distant colour, but it's a bit too bright. As objects move into the distance, they get duller. So I'm going to add a little bit of raw umber, which will just take a little bit of that brightness off that green. There we go. There are two starting colours. I might also put in a couple of clouds, a big cloud here and a smaller cloud here. So for that, I'm going to pick up my size 12 brush. There's no standard amongst brush manufacturers regarding round watercolour brushes, so it's better to, if someone says I'm using a particular brush, just get an idea of how much hair is on it, and then if you want a similar brush, you just go and look for a brush with that amount of hair. So I'm going to get my size 12 brush, take out about 3/4, maybe not 3/4, about half the paint from the brush, and I'm going to create a big cloud here and a smaller cloud over here. So I'm going to use the side of the brush, barely touching the paper, and that'll give me this first cloud, come to about there, and then here I'm going to have a smaller cloud poking out through the side. I've just used the side of the brush to create the edge of the cloud, and now I'm going to come in and fill in the rest of the area. Maybe add a little bit more there. Okay, let's bring this across. And clean my brush, and with just clean water, I'm going to drag the rest of this sky colour down. I'll just add a little bit more blue and paint it down to the horizon. There we go. And that'll give us a little bit of haze in the distance. Before that dries too much, I'm going to clean my brush, tap it a few times, then I'm going to come in and here and there touch the edge of the cloud, but I'm going to leave areas that are untouched so that you end up with a very bright sharp edge here and there, and then a slightly duller body of the cloud. I'll add some more cobalt blue to parts of this cloud to give it some more form. Thing to note here is I've got my two clouds, a bigger one and a smaller one, and I've used it to divide this sky shape into irregular shapes, and that just makes for a more interesting composition. I've also painted the sky all the way down to the horizon. Now I'm going to pick up my ground colour, drag the brush through the edge of my palette and take out about 3/4 of the paint.
You don't have to paint exactly on the horizon line.
A little bit of green into the hill's not a bad thing. But I want to just very quickly move my brush and give a hint of glimpses of that distant road. And then as I come back here, quick brush strokes. And I want the same strength of paint on either side of the road. So I'm sort of wanting to work more down the paper. There we go. When I get to this point, I'm going to add a little bit more raw umber, and this will just thicken the paint, and that gives it a stronger tone, and it will also just warm it up a little bit and again help to add a bit of depth to our painting. There we go. Now I'm going to pick up a size 8 brush, which is much smaller. Pick up some of this dull green. I'll add a little bit of burnt sienna to it.
Now I'll just drag that across the surface of the road.
We'll have some little highlights on it, but also just be somewhat indistinct. Add a bit more blue. Maybe I'll add some French ultramarine to it, a bit more burnt sienna. And then just here and there, I'll just define the edge. Trying to give the road a little bit of character. And then this distant one doesn't have to have a lot of white showing through. There we go. So at this stage, we've got our sky.
And we've painted the ground. Often I'll spatter some paint in the foreground to add more depth to the painting.
Just very lightly splatter a little bit of paint. Again, this is just an exercise, right? And it's more important to learn from it rather than to think you have to have a perfect painting from it. You learn just as much, if not more, from your mistakes than you do from a perfect painting. Now just get rid of some of this excess moisture. You've got to get rid of the water around the edge, because sometimes if that spills over onto the side of your painting, you can get a cauliflower, which is, you know, where the wet paint falls onto a barely damp painting surface and it pushes the other paint away and creates this shape that looks a bit like a cauliflower, hence its name. Even at this stage, you can see we've got a nice looking landscape, and we haven't yet put in the mountain range. So I'm going to dry that because I want sharp edges for this hill in the distance. If I went in there now, I'd get a soft edge, which I do sometimes want, but in this case I want sharper edges. So I've dried this with a hairdryer, just giving it a moment to cool down. If you don't wait for the paper to cool down, the paint, when you first put it on, instead of flowing down the paper, it just very quickly evaporates and you can end up with a streaky look to your painting brush strokes. For the hill in the distance, I'm going to use some French ultramarine and a small amount of permanent rose. And the hill has to be darker than the ground below it, because vertical shapes tend to be darker than horizontal shapes.
Because horizontal shapes usually get more light from the sky. I'll add just a hint of burnt sienna to the mix. I'll just test that, and that's pretty good.
Again, I'm using my size 12 brush. It's very easy to paint with it. I keep that leading edge wet. There we go.
I'm going to use some of the green I have here to modify this hill to make it appear closer to the viewer.
There we go. Then I'll go back to my size 8 brush, get some raw umber and just mix it into some of this other green I've got here. And I want to use that to create some distant trees. They're a long way away, so these trees are just going to be very small. And that's just to break up that sharp line that I put in at the horizon. Just something like that. Then I'll make the odd tree bigger, and that will bring it forward. Just using the side of the brush, a little flick. Let's bring this one forward a little bit too. Maybe another one here. See, I'm painting into that distant hill so that
the tops of the trees get lost into the background. Add a little bit of burnt sienna and French ultramarine to some of the green to use for the trunks.
that'll do. I'm going to use some of this leftover hill colour, and that makes a nice shadow colour, and I'm going to use that to give these trees a shadow. And that immediately means the light's coming from this direction. And use some of this dark green to add a darker side to these trees.
I'll make the trunks a bit thicker for these trees that are closer to the foreground.
There we go. And that's just about it. You can put a little fence maybe along the road. So I've painted this from a perspective looking down onto this scene.
I'll throw in a slightly bigger bush back here.
There we go.
Now I'll put a few birds in the sky.
And I put birds in the sky because they help direct the eye. I'll put one bird here. I try to avoid the peaks of the hills. Have this bird flying into the painting. Maybe another one here. And then vary their shape and size. They don't all have to look like birds. There we go. And then it's pretty much done, short of signing it. Before I do that, I like to have a mat around my painting so that I know just where to position the signature.
A couple of these L-shaped mats are very useful.
I just had a regular mat and I cut it at the corners so I had two L's. And then you can use it to create mats of various shape while you do your signing or when you're trying to think through any design issues you may have. In this case I'm going to sign it here because I've got a peak on this side and a bigger tree on this side. So I think a signature down on the bottom right will help balance that a little bit. I like to sign with a brush. I think it makes it look a little bit more arty. And that's it for this exercise. So basically what we have done is we've covered a graded wash, where we've gone from a darker tone to a lighter tone, how to create simple clouds, how to create a simple ground and add a little bit of depth to it, and then positioning items in the landscape, in this case like hills, trees and the birds. Hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, please give the video a like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so, and hit the notification bell because that lets you be notified anytime I post a painting. I look forward to seeing you for the next one.